Hello, and thank you for joining us for another episode of 2 Feet Deep. We want to thank Silverman Sound for producing all of the royalty-free music that you hear in today's episode. If you're interested in experiencing some royalty-free music for yourself, head on over to silvermansound.com. We hope you enjoy today's episode.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to 2 Feet Deep, where we have fun with Christian concepts and theology through a variety of ways. I'm Eddie Brumley, and I'm sitting here with my best buddy in the whole world, Derek Margraf. How you doing, Derek?
Hey, I'm doing good today. Well, I mean, it's been a
Work
rough
that out.
start, but it's been a rough start. I'm not going to lie, but you know what? We're going to make it. We're going to be fine. We're up and rolling, so I'm excited about that.
Yeah, I'm very excited about that. Today is our Christmas extravaganza. Yay!
Ooh, Christmas. Who doesn't love Christmas? Actually, lots of people.
Yeah.
Lots of people will have already turned this episode off knowing no things about Christmas.
One of my favorite Christian heroes, C.S. Lewis, could not stand Christmas, or at least most of what happened at Christmas.
Really? That's so crazy. I never knew that because I absolutely love C.S. Lewis. As a matter of fact, Spotify just brought out through their premium subscription like 15 hours a month of audiobook listening. And I
Mm-hmm.
have never read The Magician's Nephew. It's the only
Yeah.
book in the Chronicle of Narnia series that I've never read. And I love all 6 other books. I love them. Probably my favorite is A Horse and His Boy.
Mm.
And so yesterday, I think I listened to the first 11 of 15 chapters of
Yeah.
that book
So
and
you're
really
reading
enjoying it.
my favorite. Yeah, that is my personal favorite. I love The Magician's Nephew, and it's never been put to cartoon or movie, and I think it's just absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, no, it's so fun to see that interpretation and the oh gosh, all the biblical interpretation put into Narnia and Aslan and the creation story. I mean, really good stuff. Lots of good stuff. Anyway,
Well,
totally not where I
apparently.
expected to go.
No, but apparently C.S. Lewis didn't dismiss Christmas altogether. I mean, Santa Claus, Father Christmas, makes an appearance in the first book, but there were
Yes.
lots of things about Christmas that made him grumpy. He didn't like Christmas cards. He apparently didn't really like Christmas parties.
Well,
Grumpy
he
old
does.
guy.
He strikes me as, and I could be totally wrong. I've not done any kind of research on him as a person himself. I've read many of his books and loved them, but he strikes me as a person who likes to be in a room with the people that he's close to, and that's it.
Yep.
Not much of an extrovert beyond that.
Nope. No, he was a bachelor for most of his life, and I always think bachelorhood does weird things to guys. We get weirder the longer we're left alone. Well,
Well, take
okay,
us into
so
the show. What do we got today?
entertainment exegesis. We're talking about Christmas, and I'm gonna do this in slow motion so you'll have time to comment between portions of this, but the celebration of Christ's birth seems not to have caught on until about the 4th century. Now, for you non-historians, the 4th century is the 300s. So 300 years into Christianity is when it first becomes an idea to start celebrating Jesus' birthday. Um, and the date picked for observing his birth has more to do with missional concerns and theology than trying to be accurate about historical dates and times. Uh, Basically, we celebrate Jesus' birthday in December, not because the church is trying to play a trick on us and not because they made a mistake about when Jesus' birthday was, but they pick the date because of missional sensitivities. So I'm going to stop there, just see if anything you want to say on that before I go plowing into any more detail.
Well, obviously, I know this information as well, but I would like you to, and maybe you're going to, I don't know, explain a little further of what you mean by a missional aspect of why this date was chosen. What was
Yep.
going on with this date, or I mean, why was this date something that was going to be all of a sudden amazingly missional as opposed to uh, December 13th or January
Yep.
second or anything,
Yep.
what makes this one date specific?
So to start, I think one of the things that sometimes people think of is they think of Christianity as maybe being a white person religion or a European centered religion. And it's really, really important to say that for the first 2 or 3 centuries, Africa, parts of Asia, and the Mediterranean world was the epicenter of Christianity. Places like England, Norway, places like that are still. It's not that missionaries are not getting there, but it will be still centuries before those areas are what we might think of as predominantly Christian. And
Mm.
as Christianity starts to get to the north, uh, it is important to think about what it's like to live in the far north. So, Bruce Forbes writes this really great book, Christmas, A Candid History. And he asks us to think about what winter is like for people who live in the far north. And he says, so what's it like? Well, it's cold and it's dark. And the further north you move, the rain turns to sleet and snow, and the temperatures drop low enough to discourage most of outdoor work and play, things that humans enjoy doing. The days are shorter, the hours of darkness longer. And if you've lived in places like Minnesota, Alaska, or Finland, you probably know that winters can be long and miserable. In some communities, winter corresponds with a steep rise in depression, alcoholism, domestic violence, and suicide. For ancient people living in the far north, it was a challenge just to survive the winter. So, what did they do to cope? Well, one of the things they did is a midwinter festivities. And these parties took place at the height of winter as a way of celebrating that spring would soon be coming. During the darkest days of winter, people in the far north would anticipate the warmth and the light of spring, and that the light would begin pushing back the darkness. So at winter solstice, right at the place where you've got the longest nights, is when far northern people would celebrate that spring was coming, because they knew that they had lived through the worst of it. And that didn't mean there still wasn't winter left to wreak havoc, but they knew that light and warmth would start pushing back that darkness. And that was a big, big celebration for these ancient pre Christian people.
So this was a celebration of hope at this particular point about what was to come.
That's right. It is a celebration of hope. That's right. It is a celebration of hope. So, yeah, so as Christian missionaries get there, they start getting into Northern Europe. These midwinter celebrations are really important to these people. And yes, they have lots of pagan tie ins, but they are culturally vital to these communities. And so the Christian missionaries, right, they have a choice that missionaries always have. Do we negate all of this? Do we tell these people they've got to just kind of reinvent their culture from ground up, that that Jesus doesn't approve of all of these things? Or do they find a way to meet it with the gospel? And so rather than asking the people to give up something that's vitally important to them, the church seeks to redeem it and to transform it and to give it a higher purpose.
Now, this is interesting because back in our Halloween episode, when we were discussing the origins of Halloween, and we talked about again some of the silly festivities that started and made it, and none of it initially started off as something particularly evil or with evil intent. Um, and we had a discussion about certain people struggling with Halloween because of the pagan tie-ins, and I said at the time that there are actually more pagan tie-ins to Christmas than there are Halloween. And I just want to name a few real quick, and I'm going to tie it into what you're just saying.
Yep.
These are all aspects that we celebrate in Christmas today that actually came out of the pagan rituals. Christmas caroling, your bright Christmas sweaters, which we could even call ugly Christmas sweaters today, your decorated Christmas tree, your Yule log, your ringing of the Christmas bells, even your gift giving and exchanging, your feasting, your big supper dinners, your feasting of merriment, and mistletoe, your kissing under the mistletoe. All those are 8 things, all that come from some sort of pagan ritualistic practice. Now, my question in tying these in, and maybe you know, and maybe you don't, but are these some of the things that they were celebrating at the winter solstice while they were pagans that the church tried to say, okay, we're not going to change every single thing you do, but we're going to try to reinterpret the meaning of this day as a whole and use these things that are familiar to you as a way to even celebrate the hope of Christ as opposed to just the hope of spring.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm going to introduce a theological term here, and it will confuse probably some people, especially maybe in the southern parts of the United States, because when they hear the phrase I'm about to use, they equate it with one portion of the church as to the exclusion of the other, and that is the idea of Catholic Christianity. And of course, especially in the South, southern part of the United States, I say Catholic Christianity, people immediately think Roman Catholic, not Protestant, not evangelical, not free church. And but that is not how I'm using the term here. I'm using the term in a much, much more theological way. Catholic Christianity, as say, for example, in the Apostles' Creed, where we say we believe in the Holy Catholic Church. Part of what we mean by that
Little
is
c.
that little c. Yeah. What we mean by Catholic Christianity is we mean that Catholic Christianity makes sense in every culture. That makes sense in every culture. And that Christianity belongs to every culture. And I'll give you 2 biblical references for that. And it's the book of Galatians and the book of Revelation. And the 2 of the central claims of the book of Galatians and the book of Revelation is that God comes to redeem not only individual people, but cultures, and not to replace or eradicate them, but to transform them.
That's
Uh,
great.
yeah, one of the mistakes the church has made again and again and again is to mistake the whole culture with Christianity, right? So the first followers of Jesus were Jewish. And when Gentiles started coming into the church, they really struggled about how Jewish did these people need to be in order to be followers of Jesus. And it took some time for them to work through that. But the conclusion they arrived at is they didn't have to be Jewish at all. But that was challenging, right? Because if at the time the entire church is Jewish, it's weird when Gentiles show up. And you've got to figure out
Mm-hmm.
what that means.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes Western missionaries have gotten this right, and sometimes they've gotten it wrong. Sometimes they get to places like Hawaii and think that they've got to first turn these people into uh, Northern Europeans or North Americans before they can introduce them to Jesus. But sometimes they get, the missionaries get it right and recognize I don't have to first make these folks anything like me in order for them to receive Jesus. They're God, the Holy Spirit, has already prepared well in advance for these people to be capable of receiving Jesus, responding accordingly, and beginning to follow Jesus through repentance and faith. And so yes, lots of the things, the hollies and the evergreens, lots of that symbolism is pagan. But what the church says is that you're celebrating the light pushing back the darkness. Man, do we have a story to tell you about the light of the world that came into the world that the darkness could not overcome. And so they start telling the story of Jesus' birth, right?
Yeah, what a great tie in for even that festival that they're already celebrating. Because they're celebrating that very thing in a very real manner because they are cold, they're dark, they're ready for some sunlight to hit them, to warm up, to reinvigorate life in them and their people. And what a wonderful tie in to say, look, that is awesome and wonderful, but we've even got something better. We've got an eternal light that will keep you warm even in the darkness.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a beautiful message, and so the fact that and throughout the rest of the show, we're going to see how Christmas is not only reflecting Nordic cultures, but has picked up a lot of things along the way. So we get into later in the show, we'll see that Christmas has been quite able to adapt a lot of interesting things, and we'll get into that. But now it's time for what the what, or as we
What the
what the
what?
what? So this one is falls right on the back. If December 25th is not actually Jesus' birthday, do we know about the time of year Jesus was born? And you probably
This
know this too.
well, this is I think this is a great question. Um I it, because you hear I've read things and heard things that no, well, we know that Jesus was actually born in the spring because of this or because of that, and then I've actually heard arguments that say no, well, we actually do believe that he was born in December because of this and because of that, and there's a lot of different discussions out there, both with some, I think, good, correct information, but also a lot of probably not correct information. So I and going to set back, I see here that in our show outline that you've listed Luke 2:8 through 10, and of course, if it was as simple as three verses in the Bible that told us when Jesus's date was, then we wouldn't have any discussion or argument at all. So I'm going to sit back and let you explain a little bit, and then
Yeah.
we'll go forward with our discussion.
Yeah, well, we'll see if you have some corresponding data or even some conflicting data, because conflicting data can be important too. But I'm going with the argument that Luke 2:8 through 10 give us at least an approximate time. So one of the things, in fact, we were dealing with this in a Bible study recently. There is a lot of misnomer about shepherds. And one of the things you may or unless you've been hiding under a rock, you know that one of the guests at the birth of Jesus are shepherds, and there is just so much misinformation about what the significance of that is. And one of the it's just blatantly wrong. But one of the things you'll often hear, even from like pulpits, is that shepherds were the outcast of Jewish society, and nobody would have invited a shepherd, and shepherds were just next to thieves and and prostitute ringleaders, and and that by inviting shepherds, God was, signaling that the scumbags of the earth were welcomed. Now, no doubt, all of that's true. That even the scumbags of the world. I mean, Jesus comes into the world to save sinners, and that means that even ruffians and horrible people like you and me are invited to come. But shepherds were not miscreants. They were not the outcasts of society. In fact, it's so easy to prove this one that that it's not even funny how easy this one is to prove. I mean, the first of all is Psalm 23, right in the heart of the Old Testament. The Lord is my shepherd, and
Shepherd.
yeah, and and I really don't think that Jewish piety would be saying the Lord is a scumbag. The
Right.
Lord is a miscreant. The Lord is somebody. I mean, that doesn't even make sense.
Yeah,
Right?
the Lord is somehow the ringleader of prostitutes, which today we would call a pimp.
That's right.
That is
And
absolutely not what we were, not
right.
what they were by any
Right,
means.
and from the very beginning, from the stories of the patriarchs like Abraham, and to the lawgiver himself, Moses, to the king par excellence, David. What do all of them have in common? All of them participated in being shepherds. I would say that far from being the miscreants and whatever, there's even a little bit of romanticism, in the same way that in North America being a cowboy is a little bit of a romantic notion. And in truth,
Huh.
it's a tough, difficult job. If you do ranching or whatever, it's actually a really tough job. But in North America, there is a romantic. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, late '70s, early '80s, there was this phenomenon, the urban cowboy, and people that lived in places like San Francisco and Chicago were dressing in chaps and, and cowboy hats.
Oh, that's hilarious.
I mean, everybody wanted to be a cowboy, and it's part of our romantic background in the United States. I would say in the Middle East, shepherding is kind of like that. And
Now, do we want to drop the bomb on everybody that the majority of shepherds were women, were girls?
that's right. Yeah, I think that's really important. Well, truthfully, yeah, the majority of it is children,
I
right?
know.
So, yeah, and most of it's female. It's something daughters can do, but that does change at one time a year. At one time a year, you have the birthing season. That's usually in March to early April, and at that point, the men are going to take the place of their daughters, because they're going to have to be out in the fields attending these animals by night, and as these animals are going through the very fragile, very dangerous process of giving birth, and these animals are too valuable to leave that to chance, and it is while the shepherds were out in the fields keeping watch by night, which we know when that happens, that Jesus is being born, and some of them see a sign in the heavens that indicate that Messiah has been born. So
Right.
now, if you've got data that says elsewhere, let's hear it and let's talk about it. But I find that pretty convincing.
And so again, so you're saying specifically, what is your date time frame?
March or early April.
Okay. All right. So I have a couple of things pulled up um, that are one is the September theory of Christmas.
Ooh,
So
let's hear it.
yeah, and this is a brand new one to me. Like in this moment, I started looking up those other theories because I knew that we were wanting to talk. And
Okay.
this one, it says that why do biblical scholars like N. Paul believe that the true date for Christmas ought to be in September? It
Ooh,
comes from a close reading of the clues left behind in Luke, particularly what the Gospel's authors have to say about the timing of the birth of John the Baptist in relation to Jesus.
ooh,
And
okay.
that's it. Yeah, that's interesting to me because I've never even considered, of course, John the Baptist and Jesus are very linked in every aspect, including being related. Um, of the of Jesus's coming, with of course John the Baptist coming first and predicting the way, preparing the way, baptizing people before Christ came, and baptizing Christ, blah blah blah. For some reason, it's never occurred to me to think, okay, how closely were they born? We know that both their parents were pregnant at the same time. Um, I don't know. I haven't read this whole article, but it says Luke's version of Christmas story doesn't begin with Mary and
That's
Joseph,
true.
but with another couple, Elizabeth and Zachariah, who were old and childless, of course. Zachariah was a priest in the temple, and one day, the angel Gabriel comes and tells him that his wife's going to be pregnant. He doesn't believe him. He ends up having to be muted because of his lack of faith. That's all part of that story. I'm not reading the article. I'm just kind of updating here. But when that service in the temple was over, Zechariah went home, and Elizabeth soon became pregnant after all that happened in the temple. And so, what does that story really have to do with Jesus? The angel Gabriel also visited Mary and told her that Mary was going to conceive the birth of Jesus, the Son of God. And though she was a virgin, Luke tells us that the second visitations to Mary happened in the 6th month of Elizabeth's pregnancy. So, with that key fact, they take that and say it's possible to deduce that Jesus was conceived 6 months after John was conceived. But that only helps us if we know exactly when John the Baptist was conceived, right? Yeah. So do we know that? And that's the question that they're going to here. So again, the Bible provides more clues to that. It says Luke tells us that Zechariah belonged to the priestly division of Abijah. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but that's how I would say it.
I'll take it.
Each division of priests took turns performing sacrifices and other services in the temple. And so we get this information from 1 Chronicles 24 in the order of the temple services. It's laid out there by divisions numbering 1 through 24, with Abijah listed as 8th in rotation.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah. So as Paul calculated on his blog, I think his name was in Paul or Paul in Paul. I'll link this article in the show notes. And so anyway, it says, as Paul calculated in his blog, each priestly division served for 1 week, with the first week of the ecclesiastical calendar landing in late March. That would put Zechariah in the temple in early June. And if Elizabeth conceived soon after the angel visited Zechariah in the temple, and Mary conceived 6 months after her, then it places Jesus's birth somewhere in the September of the following year.
Ooh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, so here's probably maybe a good place to land this. So one of the things that may surprise us is that ancient people didn't have in the ancient Near East did not have the same sense of the importance of birthdays that we do. So it's not to say that they wouldn't celebrate when a child was born, but one of the things that might surprise a lot of people, this one could almost fit in the eschatological AI, be very close to your one that we did on clocks. It is only in the modern period that it has become necessary for people to know precisely when their own birthday is.
Yeah.
And it is very easy to find lots and lots and lots of examples of people before pre-modern times and even before recent pre-modern times. You would historically still call it the modern period, but before the 20th century, and even into the early 20th century, it is very easy to find lots of examples of people who don't know exactly when their own birthday is.
Yeah. And that always, I actually like Westerns a lot. And so I've actually read part of the history of some of the characters that we've romanticized, like Billy the Kid just pick any Western. I'm not going to sit here and think about 100 different ones, but we get the idea of what I'm saying. And to know that, we even struggle with those dates because of that very reason, that it just 100 years ago, 200 years ago, it wasn't a super important thing for everybody to know exactly the date that they were born. Even with Christ himself, he wasn't born in the 1st century. He was actually born what we consider BC.
Right.
Which always cracks me up. you know.
So
he was born before he was born, according to our calendars.
Right. Which really has more to do with the strangeness of documenting time, which, as we've already done in another show, our relationship with time and our relationship with technology have a close relationship. And so if you're living before the time of trains and before the time of the modern post system, most, say, 14th to 18th century time markings are going to be within 15 minutes. They're gonna say, the idea is within a quarter of an hour, this is the start or end time. It's not as precise as we like to think of, but there's no reason when people are walking and you've got approximate distances and approximate times, there's no reason to be more precise than that. And prior to that, it might just be the middle of the day, right? And but you think about, why do we need to know precisely when our birthday is? And it's primarily things that have happened in the 20th century that force us to really be able to document this. Things like Social Security. When are you going to be eligible for the state to take over your financial responsibility? When does that happen? When can you drive? At what age are you eligible to be drafted into the military? When can you legally operate an airplane or a car? And suddenly we start thinking in these, not only in these really precise terms, but we also start thinking in these rather artificial terms. So we automatically assume that if you're 16, you're probably capable of driving a car. When in some kind of reality, that might actually be quite a bit earlier. Some people might be able to actually responsibly be able to drive a car at 12. Some people I don't think are responsible enough to do that when they're 50.
Right.
The same, the same thing is, when do you become old? Which was probably one of the first 20th century questions that really started requiring an accurate birth date. When are you now old, and the state really should start thinking about providing for your care? Is that 55? Is that 60? Is that 65? And of course, part of this is because at whatever age you set, that places a burden on the rest of society to make that happen.
Right.
And and if you're thinking along those lines, which most Western countries are, you want to do the right thing, both by people who do deserve to have some respite towards the end of their life, without burdening working people with, giving maybe somebody a 40-year vacation on the public dole, right? And so you're trying to determine when that is. But it's only really that, along with Queen Victoria, who gives us our modern notion of birthdays and knowing when birthdays are, and so strangely enough, probably most Christians living before the turn of the 1800s would have never even really thought of it as being an important issue to think about when Jesus was born at all. Like, that just probably would not have been even on the radar screen for the first 1800 years of Christianity. One of the things some people will object when they think about, us celebrating Jesus' birthday on the 25th. They'll say, well, that's not really when it happened. That is a very modern, even postmodern way of thinking. That's not the first 1800 years. I doubt there was even an argument ever
Right.
about, was that really his birthday? I doubt that even occurred to anybody to ask. But before we transition out, I think it's hilarious. Ginghamburg United Methodist Church, and I love that church. It's a great missional church. But their long-term pastor did this Christmas study, and it was missional, and it was really, the intent is good. I'm poking fun a little bit, but the December campaign for missions was, it's not your birthday. But of course, as their church grew, eventually they had 2 or 3 people that December 25th actually was their birthday.
Oh. Oh, that's hilarious. They're like, actually, that is my birthday. Thank you. Oh, that's funny.
All right, let's go to what's our
Everybody's favorite part of the show.
Yeah, everybody's favorite part of the show. His name, News Game. And this is where we do a goofy, weird news story, and we'll see how Derek relates. And so I wanted to keep the Christmas theme. And this one comes from Big Think, and it's called Christmas Spooky Heritage. As the carousel of endless holiday songs pervades the backgrounds of our lives this time of year, you might notice a peculiar line. There will be scary ghost stories and tales of glories of Christmas of long, long ago. And that comes from, of course, Andy Williams' 1963 holiday classic, The Most Wonderful
Wonderful
Time.
time of the year.
Yeah. And so during Victorian years, and we're talking roughly the 1800s, it became a tradition to tell ghost stories at Christmas. And the famous example is in Charles Dickens' 1843, A Christmas Carol, which was originally titled A Ghost Story of Christmas. Four phantoms visit Ebenezer Scrooge. But Charles Dickens is not just doing something original here. He's picking up on really something that's sort of in the air and will hang around for a little more than a century, and that is the tradition of scary, spooky stories at Christmas time. Um, the Victorians would send Christmas cards, not with necessarily with Yule logs, but they would send out dark, kind of morbid Christmas cards with frogs trying to commit murder and
Maybe
and
this is why C.S. Lewis had a problem with Christmas cards.
maybe I have no idea, but basically some of the things that we would later associate with Halloween were for about a century tied to Christmas, at least for those in the Anglophile world, meaning the British influenced world, including the United States. So, what do you make of that?
Uh, um, well, I'm going to be honest. I mean, I can pull up a couple of scriptures on spirits. The problem is they don't specifically relate to either Christmas or Halloween. They just relate to spirits in general. Luke 24:39 says, "See my hands and my feet. That is I myself. Touch me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have." So, of course, this is when Jesus had returned after his death. And he was trying to say that he wasn't a spirit. So, which is not exactly what we're looking for. Matthew 27, 52 through 53 said, "The tombs also were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised, and coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many." So this does seem more spirit-oriented, but again, it doesn't seem to really have anything to do with what we're talking about. But I do have something that just came to mind.
Okay.
Hang with me. So just hang with me. Okay, here it is. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 1, which is famous thanks to what was the band? Was it the Birds? "For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven." So that's the perfect tie-in, I think, is there is a time for every season, regardless of whether that season is Christmas, whether that season is Halloween. There is clearly a time for a good ghost story, regardless of whatever it is that you're celebrating. Because who doesn't love a good, silly ghost story? And thanks to Ecclesiastes, I have now proven that true.
This is for those on that are listening. This is for the person that has to figure out how to make the connection, this one's tough, right? I mean, because you don't know in advance what the other person's bringing to the table,
Right.
and
Yeah.
you hear it and you're, what?
What am I doing? What am I doing? So yeah, for just so everybody understands, we have shared documents of our show outline with each other, so that we always know what each other are talking about and bringing to the table, so that we can form some kind of sensible discussion. The only part of it that always stays blank every week is this section of the His Name News Game. There's a mysterious link in there, and neither one of us ever click on it because we know that that would ruin the surprise element. And so it really is both of us just going into this blindly each week. Whichever one of us is not presenting the story literally has no clue what they're about to hear, and literally has however many seconds we just took to try to figure out off the top of our head how to tie
That's
this
right.
in.
That's
It is
right.
a
So
challenge.
it really it is, but it's also super fun. I mean, it's
Yeah.
super fun because, like, oh yeah, sheep that have eaten marijuana or whatever, whatever we've covered, or ghost stories used to be told at Christmas time. I mean, and then you're on the fly. You're having to think, okay, what I do with that?
Well, the funny thing is I was like, okay, so he's talking. As soon as you started quoting Andy Williams' classic, it's the most wonderful time of the year. I was like, okay, we're talking about ghost stories, and I was immediately saying, okay, I can, Charles Dickens comes to mind because, of course, that's extremely famous, and that is an extremely famous Christmas story that we all cherish and love. But it truly is a ghost story, too.
Mhm.
And I thought, okay, this is great. I'm going to nail this. And then I was like, wait a minute. I don't know any scriptures that specifically tie spirits into Christmas. And then you brought in the Halloween, and I was like, or Halloween. I was like, I have no chance. I have no chance. And I was like, okay, Ecclesiastes to everything, to every time there's a season. And I was like, okay, that I can make work to some extent.
Well, and so in just a minute, as we move into eschatological AI, there is a logical kind of progression of this show this week, and that is that um, Christmas starts with the Nordic culture. It starts with Yule logs and winter solstice and northern pagan people. As we move into the ghost stories, we're seeing Christianity and Christmas pick up other cultural things, right, from other parts of the world. And so now, as we move in eschatological AI, we're going to see that Christmas is capable of continuing to pick up other cultural things. And actually, I thought about two or three things. I'm going to sneak a second one in eschatological AI. Now, this one may seem like going backwards, but it is still really related to technology. And we're talking about Christmas music has a secret chord that makes it sound so festive. And we're going back all the way to Bing Crosby when he writes White Christmas. Now, he uses a chord out of jazz music, and we're going to make lots of tie-ins here. So, jazz music starts influencing the second generation of country music. Country music, for all those people who go, I like real country music. Real country music was hillbilly music without a bass, without a drum. But in the second generation of country music, the 1930s, 1940s, it picks up both from jazz. And one of the kind of crossover artists is Bing Crosby, and he writes the generation's most famous Christmas song for the World War II generation. And he uses a D minor 7 with a flat 5. Now, for anybody who's not a musician, you may be thinking, okay, I don't even know what that means. But he uses a chord that will, and because that song is so influential, that it will become, for the rest of the 20th century, what Christmas music sounds like. So, first of all, it's a minor chord. And just to keep music theory really, really, really simple, a minor chord has sort of a sad melodic or sad, melancholy,
A little darker of a
feel.
sound.
Yeah, darker of sound. Major's bright, happy. Minor is kind of darker, more broody, more sad. When you add a flat 5, all you need to know is that all music wants to have resolution. So it wants to resolve back to the root note, and
Especially when you're dealing with sevens.
that's right.
Especially.
And
Anytime you hear a 7, you really want to hear that resolve.
right. So you've got this minor 7 that already it wants to go home. Think about it that way. It wants to go home. And then they add a flat 5, which makes it really want to go home. Which White Christmas was written primarily for GIs that were going to be spending who knew how many years away from home, right? And they were pining to be back home. And instead, they're in foreign lands fighting wars. And so Bing Crosby puts this chord that has two things in it. Well, it has a sad, kind of moody thing in it, and then it has two pieces of it that make the listener feel like it wants to go home. And so the song's about I want to go home. I want to be home for Christmas, and I can't be. And the chord that defines the song adds to that I want to go home. So when Mariah Carey wrote what my kids think is a classic Christmas song, All I Want for Christmas Is You, when they got in the studio, they said, look, if you want a hit, and you want a song that's going to be played on every Christmas commercial from here till Jesus comes back, you put this chord in there. You can sing anything else you want to sing in it. As long as you've got that in there, people are going to think this is a Christmas song. It is a pretty good song, but
Yeah. Maybe a little
the reason
played, but all in all, I can remember when it came out. I can remember where I worked. It was at a Christmas party. Somebody had bought the Mariah Carey Christmas CD that year, and we played that song. And I was like, we all were like, "Wow, that's a really good Christmas song. That's probably going to stick around." And here we are, 20, 30 years later, because I think I was about 16 at the time or whatever, and 20 years later. 30 years later, I guess. And golly, it's played every year, everywhere, all the time.
Oh yeah, one of the biggest songs in the world and one of the most famous Christmas songs of all time. And it really is about a technological idea and a cultural idea. So it absorbs, so this musical idea really comes from jazz, and jazz is really, the result of West Africans coming and taking some of their ideas, some of their musical ideas, adding it to American music, and you really get maybe the quintessential form of American music, jazz, along with blues, and of course it'll influence everything for the rest of the time, right? Rock and roll and country and everything, and so here is one of those things that feels as traditional as the nativity story itself, and yet it has its origins really in the 1940s. Has its origins in the 1940s, and yet it feels as Christmas as anything else we do. Yeah,
It's so interesting, the power of a chord, to make us feel all of those things. And it's funny because, I think what makes Christmas music so enjoyable is that there's a relatable feeling in it of missing someone or enjoying someone's company, or the enjoyment of sitting around a dinner table, or longing to be able to sit around a dinner table. All of those longing and enjoyment feelings come up that help uh, bring in that season of what we now associate as that Christmassy feeling. And
that's
it's
right.
funny, the power of music in general, and then the power of a chord to say, hey, if you really want this to feel like a Christmas song, got to have this in there. Doesn't have to be everywhere in the whole song, but put it in the song, and people are going to feel that longing and desire for Christmas. That's so
That's right.
interesting.
Now the one I was going to sneak in, I told you I was going to sneak in a second one. So I was looking, I was just really trying to, and I already knew this one, but it didn't fit perfectly in eschatological AI because it's not really technical, but it does kind of fit the overall theme. And I was looking at Christmas traditions around the world, and one of the places where Christmas has become wildly popular is in a place that has never had a very strong Christian presence, and that's Japan. And if you live in Japan, one of the things you associate with Christmas, it is the traditional Christmas meal, Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Boy, it doesn't get any better than that. I'm going to Japan for Christmas. Who
Oh man, I
doesn't?
am too.
I'm not a huge turkey fan. I'm gonna be real honest. And
Yep.
at Christmas and Thanksgiving, you get turkey and you get ham. Those are kind of
Right.
traditionally what's on the table. I like ham as much as the next guy. But man, if you were telling me that there was going to be some KFC on the dinner table for Christmas dinner, I'd be like, that's what I'm eating. I'm not having the ham. I'm not having the turkey. I'm having the KFC.
That's right. That's right. And so, Christmas came after World War II, basically, for Japan, and they quickly decided to become part of the Western world. And Christmas was sort of an exotic Western holiday that has a lot of fun elements. And so, even very secular or even Buddhist Japanese said, "Man, this is a fun holiday," kind of the way a lot of us do with Halloween. But it was very linked to the Western world, and Kentucky Fried Chicken, along with McDonald's, were very successful Western franchises that quickly found ways to get a market share in those places, right? And so, um, and so, when we started all the way back at the beginning, one of the objections of Christmas is, well, a lot of the celebration is Nordic pagan stuff, and we just really raised the question, well, can God use that Nordic pagan stuff to celebrate his son's birth? But throughout the rest of this time, we've looked at other things that come from other cultures, like jazz, and the blend of basically Scottish, Welsh Americans along with African Americans creating this new music called jazz, to Japanese taking hillbilly food from Kentucky, and we both say that because we're from Kentucky, and that becoming a part of what it means to celebrate Christmas. I think the large question of this whole episode is: does God love just individual people, or does He love cultures, nations, and ethnicities, and the Book of Revelation says that when everything's complete and God's renewed this world, there's going to be a great crowd of witnesses, this great multitude of people from every tongue, tribe, ethnicity, language, nation, who are worshiping God, who are worshiping the God of the Bible and worshiping the Lamb, Jesus Christ, but in ways that are culturally and ethnically distinctive to themselves. And all of that is going to bring glory to God.
Yeah, when you ask the question, does God love individuals or does God love nations and cultures? I was going to say yes.
Yeah.
It's all the above. Of course, He loves us individually, but He loves us collectively equally. And that's
Yeah.
what a great place to land, because that's exactly where we opened up with these Nordic cultures bringing in the idea of the cold celebrations and the Christmas and the winter solstice. Well, way to go full circle, Eddie. Our first episode that stayed themed all the way out. Folks, don't expect it again.
Yeah, I'm writing another episode, and it is not this tight.
Right, yeah. So yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is your Christmas present from us to you. Is that your first and only completely themed episode? Oh, brother, what a great day! A lot of great fun information for a wonderful holiday that I hope and pray everybody um, gets to spend time with their family, gets to enjoy the season for what it is for you to celebrate the birth of Christ and the celebration of getting to spend time with those you love, friends, whether it be family, whatever it is for you. We do wish you guys a very Merry Christmas. Once again, we want to thank all of our listeners for joining us today on 2 Feet Deep. If you would like to reach out with any questions or thoughts, please email us at 2feetdeeppodcast@gmail.com. We hope you enjoyed today's show, and we'll see you next time.